While listening to KWAI 1080 on your AM dial, we are broadcasting from the top of the Chinese Cultural Plaza here in Honolulu, Hawaii. Today is the 29th day of April, and we enter into our second half of the first hour. Does that complicate things? The second half of the first hour of our program. We had just been talking about at least my opinions with regards to GMO and whether or not they should or should not be labeled. If you would like to call and share an opinion, also we spoke very briefly about homelessness and one way of politicizing homelessness, taking an idea that is being practiced in France right now, in fact. And this comes to us by a listener who lives in France, from Dominique. Okay, the telephone number here is 524-1080. If you have any comments, we'll put you on the radio and we'll go from there. Other than that, today I had a very interesting meeting with several community members who are very concerned about education. It was a very broad topic with a particular interest of generating more immersion schools in the Hawaiian language. And Ho'ipo DeCambra and I had been involved in an experience a few years back, before charter schools had even come about. And we were talking about, and Ho'ipo had been actually the second community scholar in residence, taking from the community, being brought into the university system to be a scholar in residence, to advise students, to bring in fresh ideas in the university, into the university from a community person. And Ho'ipo's response, as she was invited to be a community scholar in residence at the university, the Manoa campus, she said, "I'm willing to do it on the condition that at least 50% of our classes are held in the community." Such purity in logic. You know, you want a community scholar in residence, and don't remove me from my, well, what do you call it? The pond in which I swim. Come to the community and see what we do. And so through that, students at the University of Hawaii, along with, right now I forget his name, is Professor of Education and Politics and Education, I think it was, agreed, and so they conducted class in the community, inviting community members to come and join and speak on the subject of education. I was fortunate to be invited by Ho'ipo to also come and join in the discussion. And there were a number of us, not only from the Waianae community, although all of our meetings in the community was held in Waianae, but we had people coming from different parts of the community, or different places in Hawaii, who joined in these discussions. And out of these ideas came, I think, the instigation to start the charter school system, by which we could step outside of the formal DOE system and begin charter schools. Now this, as I said before, was all before the state had adopted a state statute to set up the charter schools. When we first applied for a charter school, we applied directly to the Department of Education, the U.S. DOE, and were turned down because they said either the state Department of Education will have to support your application, or the state legislature will have to adopt a law that provides for charter schools. And hearing that, then out of the Big Island, they began to lobby the legislature to get a charter school law passed, and then we have had charter schools after that. Moving back to the Waianae discussion, what we engaged in that review of education and the failures of education and the failures of that education system in the Waianae community, if you look at the statistics, you'll find that there are probably all but one of the schools in Waianae, and I include Nanakuli, had been at the bottom of the rung in terms of educational excellence. And so we asked ourselves, what's going on? What is wrong? Why is education failing our students? And so in asking that question, we got deeper and deeper into a philosophical discussion of what is education? What should education really mean to the students who are being, quote, educated? And who are the students? Well, in the Waianae, first of all, we were saying that education should be lifelong. It shouldn't be limited only to a period of a certain age for people, but it should be lifelong. So we should step outside and go inside the DOE, step outside and continue with education as being continuous, not only during the school hours, but anytime a child wants to receive education in a particular area, we should create opportunities such as going to see a fisherman and learning how to do, let's say, what we had out at the Opelo project with Uncle Walter Paulo, teaching the Miloli'i style of scoop or hoop net lane, and or they could go up to the farms and ask to be educated and find specialists and recognize that as important aspects of education, and don't just separate other endeavors such as fishing and farming as non-educational. And we should get people all involved in the practice of education. Education for especially an indigenous, a heavily indigenous community. Is it the same as education for a non-indigenous community who has moved into the community and essentially becomes a settler population, bringing in their values, their expectations as to what education is and as to what their life should be all about? And as we analyzed that, we said that, well, for indigenous people, education really carries a different significance. Normally, the DOE has been following this mantra, and it's called school to work, school to work, school to work. And that is a result of the DOE becoming sort of like a puppet for the industrial or for the business community. The demands being made by the governor or by the business community on the governor on the system of education, you're not producing the kind of students we need. We need more of them in following different kind of classes and all that. Don't worry about the fishermen. We don't need the fishermen. And your musicians, well, try to cut back on that. And art and physical education, we don't really need that. Business needs a different breed of, production factors. Yes, they're human beings, but we need to have them close to automatons. Never mind about the concept of beauty and enjoyment and the rest. We need them on the in the industrial processes. School to work, school to work, school to work. And I am overstating the case, I know, but just to exemplify what essentially is being asked. And so we ask the second question, well, for indigenous communities, what's the difference? Isn't that what we are trying to get them to become? To become good citizens, to fill a need in the community, and that is becoming good employees. And as we talked among ourselves, most of us were indigenous or very close to the indigenous people themselves, saying, well, probably not. For indigenous people, the struggle is not necessarily school to work. The struggle is to maintain a continuity of consciousness of who we are. Not to lose that understanding. And along with that is the language, is the culture, is the philosophical foundation, is the practices, is the environment that we have worked within that makes us, us. We already have enough pressures to conform to the colonial, if you like, the occupied, if you like, or the majority society. But for indigenous people, we are hanging by the thread of recognizing who we are. Even our names have been lost. So that we are finding parents are not naming their children our own names. And names are so sacred because it gives us an understanding of who we are. It becomes our prophecy of who we are to become and how we are to develop. And we have lost the understanding of, or the importance of, naming children. And so we said, well, what we have is a big difference between education for a settler population and education for an indigenous population. In our particular case, a Native Hawaiian population. But the Native Hawaiian population is a word amalgamated, appropriate, so mixed, so intertwined with the local population that Native Hawaiian local is almost one and the same out in the Waianae area. Although our numbers are very high, over 50%, maybe 60, 70% Native Hawaiians. But you have the Japanese, you have the Howlers, you have the Portuguese, you have many others who are just as much keiki oka aina and are not inheriting that continuity of Hawaiian consciousness. Heck, most of our students, at least during my time, and many of us, had never even known about our own history. So we found that education for our population was to maintain the continuity of historical consciousness, and from that we would be able to leap out further into our futures by having a good springboard of our culture, our history, our language, our understanding of who we are, so that we are no longer schizophrenic individuals having to walk between two worlds. And so whenever we enter into the education world, we have to, what is called ho'ohaole, or become like or make like the foreigner. And only when we go home or when we get out of school or during recess, then we can be who we are. This splitting of our students very often results in the failures that we find in our schools. This is not to say that we have had some successes in our public schools in the Waianae area. But as compared to the general population, that has not been the case. So what we did was we came out with a new philosophical foundation for what education should be. And based on that philosophical foundation, began to structure an approach to how to change the system of education in the community. So that's when we started this movement, created organization called Kawaihona o Kana'auau, the treasure chest of intellectuality. And what we said was that we need to take education beyond the institutions that is called education, beyond the schools. We need to be pervasive. We need to start changing minds and attitudes with regards to what education really should be. And the Department of Education hopefully will change, but they will only change when they say proof of a better educational system, not based on the hairy-fairy theories of Ho'ipo di Cambro or Poka Lainui or others, but they wanted to see, and rightfully so. Let's see the results. How are you creating better human beings as a result of your theoretical model and your specific curriculum? And so we began working on that. We had thought that, no, first of all, we don't want to create an elite school within the Waianae community. We don't want to reproduce Kamehameha schools, but in the Waianae community, we don't want to create this elitist approach. What we wanted to do was infect the community of schools. Because just to take 10 children and make them doctors and lawyers and engineers and all these specialized practitioners was not the goal. In other words, we're concerned about the 99% as well as that other 1%. So we said that through this experience, we want to change the whole educational setup. So it was an egalitarian rather than an elitist movement that we have been trying to create. And so we said that we will begin with a charter school and then flow these students back into the regular system after they come out at, let's say, the 6th grade level, to give them the tools that are needed so that they can soar as they go through the 7th through the 12th grade, and use that as the basis of evidence, and use that as an opportunity for other children who did not have the opportunity to attend this specialized school to gain from the shared experience of students that we produce, and then hopefully have teachers and the DOE system begin to recognize the improvement in the education system and begin making changes within the Department of Education. So that was one tactic that we had wanted to approach. It's this very generalized system of change for the whole community. So those are the plans. That is the philosophy. That is what we had dreamed about. Another part that we had talked about were other specific changes that needs to come in to play. This idea of Dai and Ola, domination, individualism, and exclusion, which seems to be pervasive in the DOE system, and yet within our kids, within our families, within our community, instead of domination, it's always Olu Olu. Instead of individualism, it's always the idea of Lokahi. Instead of exclusion, it's always the idea of Aloha, Ola. To have a different sense of relationship with one another. So we also did that kind of inquiry and says, yes, the system that we operate in must be one based on Ola rather than Dai. And so we need to restructure our educational curriculum to an Ola system. For example, the rating of students, the testing of students without cooperation, all of that we need to take a new look at and see that are there other ways of measuring success and ability to move on other than comparing one against the other? And is it not just as, and if in fact maybe even better, when students can help one another to move to the next stage, such as group learning. And sometimes I use the example, and I'll use it again, that let's say Ho'ipo and I, both graduates of or attended Waianae High School, and walk into a classroom, because that's our classroom, and sit and we hear the announcement by the teacher, okay students, we're having a pop quiz today. And here are the questions. In the meantime, I want you to all spread out, sit independently, and no cheating. Okay. So she puts 10 questions on the board. And I am sitting next to Ho'ipo. And question number 4 asks something that I don't know the answer for. So I turn to Ho'ipo and I say, Ho'ipo, what's the answer for number 4? And she says, the answer is, and then she begins to tell me what the answer is, what the teacher expects. The teacher sees Ho'ipo talking to me, and she says, Ho'ipo, how come you're talking to Poka? And Ho'ipo begins to explain, well, Poka, he don't know the answer for number 4. And probably many other questions. And so I'm telling him the answer. The teacher tells Ho'ipo and me, you folks cheating. You're cheating. So Ho'ipo says, no, I'm not cheating. Poka doesn't know the answer for number 4, so I'm telling him what the answer is. That's cheating. In a system, in the school system of testing and under a DIE approach, domination, individualism, and exclusion, in which the curriculum is based on those values, the teacher is absolutely right. Under a culture of olu'olu, lokahi, and aloha, Ho'ipo is absolutely right, and I am right in having the expectation that my sister is going to help me because I don't know the answer for this one. This is that kind of conflict in cultures that you have going on in the schools. You ring the bell, we're in recess, and our relationship is expected to change, to be cooperative, to work with aloha, to work in a community of olu, to be comfortable, kind, caring for one another. Ring the bell again, and we're in a DIE system. And as a result, many of our children are not able to walk across those parallels, those combining deep cultures. And so we become schizophrenic. We're not sure what side or where we're supposed to be. We're ping-ponging back and forth over the cultural divide, which splits the spirit of many of our people, and as they go home, they are told to operate, or they are expected to operate under a different system. But in the schools, the relationship is completely different. When the education system does not address the students in an appropriate way, what do we have? We have, according to them, what is called failures. And that's part of the changes in the education system that we need to be taking a look at. Uh-oh, the music has started up again.
Kaulana na pua o Hawaii, Kupa ama hope o ka aina, Iki mai ka elele o ka loko ino, Pala pala anunu me ka paka. Mane mai Hawaii moku o ke ave, Koku ana honoa o Pilani, Ka ko o mai kaua I o mai.